everyone, welcome back to the second episode of this podcast series. I'm Cherry, and today we are continuing our conversation on American politics because there is still a lot to unpack. Now, in the first episode, we talked about immigration enforcement. Today, we are shifting focus, but not too far, because at its core, this is still about power and how that power is used or abused. Alright, let's begin. Today's topic is voting rights, something that should be simple, something that should be untouchable, and yet it's becoming one of the most contested issues in the country. Let's start with a basic question. In a democracy, what is the one thing that must always be protected? The answer is the vote, because without it, nothing else really matters. But across the United States, new laws and regulations are making it harder for people to vote. Not easier, harder, and that should concern everyone. We are seeing stricter voter ID laws. We are seeing polling locations being reduced in certain areas. We are seeing early voting periods shortened, and we are seeing aggressive voter roll purges. All of this happening at the same time. Now, on paper, these changes are often justified as a force to protect election integrity. That is the phrase you will hear. Election integrity. But here's the problem. There is very little evidence of widespread voter fraud in the United States. Very little. Study after study has shown this. So if fraud is not the issue, then what is? Because when you make voting harder, you are not protecting democracy, you are limiting it. And the impact is not equal. That is the key point. These restrictions tend to affect certain groups more than others: low-income communities, elderly voters, students, minority populations. People who already face barriers are now facing even more. Think about that for a second. In a country that claims to be a model of democracy, millions of people are being indirectly pushed away from participating in a democracy, not by force, but by design. Let's take a step back, because this did not start yesterday. Efforts to control access to voting have a long history in the United States, and every time progress was made, there was pushback. Every single time. So, what we are seeing now is not new, but it's evolving. It's more subtle, more technical, and in some ways more effective. Because you don't need to tell people they can't vote. You just need to make it difficult enough that many of them won't. That is how modern suppression works. Now, here's the bigger question. Why does this matter so much right now? Because the country is more divided than ever. Political polarization is at a peak. Trust in institutions is declining. And in that kind of environment, every vote carries even more weight. So, limiting access to voting doesn't just affect individuals. It shapes outcomes, it shapes policies, and ultimately it shapes the future of the country. Let's be honest about something. If a political system only works well when fewer people participate, then it doesn't really work at all. Democracy is not supposed to be convenient for those in power. It's supposed to represent everyone, even the people who disagree, especially the people who disagree. Now, supporters of these laws will argue that rules are necessary, and that is true. Every system needs structure, but there is a difference between structure and restriction. And right now, that line is being crossed again and again. So, where does this leave us? In a country where voting is still legal, but not equally accessible, where the right exists but the path to exercising it is getting narrower, and that should raise a serious question. What kind of democracy is the United States becoming? Because when participation goes down, representation becomes weaker, and when representation becomes weaker, power concentrates, and when power concentrates, accountability disappears. It's a chain reaction, and we are already seeing the effects. In the future episodes, We will keep breaking down issues like this, not just what's happening, but why it's happening and who benefits. Because understanding the system is the first step to questioning it, and is the first step to changing it. That is why this podcast exists. That is why I'm here, and that is why you are listening. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me for the second episode. Stay tuned for the next one. And if this conversation made you think, share it with someone around you because those conversations matter and that voice deserves to be heard. Until next time.